The tenant, the torn marriage, and the tire iron. A cautionary tale of revenge and a ruined car door. The stage was set not in a grand theater, but in the stark, unforgiving arena of Judge Judy's courtroom, a place where the tangled webs of human relationships are unraveled under the bright, impartial lights of justice and a no-nonsense gaze that misses nothing. On one side of the divide sat the plaintiff, a man named Ethan Kovach, whose ordinary appearance belied the extraordinary and frankly bizarre situation that had brought him here. He was suing his former landlord, a man named David Goolsby, for an act of pure, unadulterated rage that had left a permanent scar not on a person, but on a possession, the driver's side door of his car. But this was far more than a simple case of property damage. This was a story that snaked its way through the wreckage of a broken marriage, a tale of betrayal, poor judgment, and a single, violent swing of a tire iron that was as much about wounded pride as it was about dented metal. To understand the moment of impact, one must first wade through the murky waters of how these three lives, Ethan Kovach, David Goolsby and David's now estranged wife, Linda Goolsby, became so tragically and inextricably intertwined. It had all begun with such mundane normalcy. Just a few months prior, at the end of a sunny June in 2015, Ethan Kovach was simply a man in need of a place to live. David Goolsby and his wife Linda had a spare room and, presumably, a need for a little extra income. They opened their home to Ethan, welcoming him in as a tenant, a boarder, a temporary fixture in their domestic life. The arrangement was straightforward, businesslike. Ethan paid his rent, kept to himself, and likely thought little of the dynamics of the marriage he was now living on the periphery of. He was a spectator in someone else's life, a guest in a house that was not his own. But then, with the sudden, shocking force of a thunderclap on a clear day, the foundation of that household shattered. Merely days after Ethan had unpacked his bags, on July 10, 2015, David Goolsby moved out. The separation was abrupt, a seismic event that reshaped the entire landscape of the home. The landlord was gone, but the tenant remained. Ethan Kovach made the decision, a decision that would later be scrutinized under the piercing lens of Judge Judy, to stay on as a tenant living with the now-separated Linda Goolsby. And here, in this new and precarious living situation, is where the first seeds of suspicion were sown, though Judge Judy would swiftly and decisively uproot them. She looked directly at Ethan, her voice cutting through any unspoken implications hanging in the air. "You have no romantic relationship with Mr. Goolsby's wife?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for ambiguity. Ethan's response was immediate and firm. "Not at all." The judge accepted this, acknowledging that the suggestion wasn't really being made, but she pinpointed the true core of the problem with laser-like precision. The issue wasn't romance. It was a catastrophic failure of judgment. It was the kind of poor decision-making that leads ordinary people into extraordinarily messy situations. This failure culminated in a fateful day in May of the following year, a day that would forever be etched in the memories of all three individuals. Linda Goolsby, now firmly on the path to divorce, needed to serve her estranged husband, David, with the official divorce papers. This is a momentous, legally significant act, the official death knell of a marriage. She had a job. She could have easily hired a professional, an anonymous, dispassionate process server to do the job. This stranger would have handed David the documents with sterile efficiency, a transaction devoid of history or emotion. But that is not what Linda Goolsby chose. She chose a path drenched in emotion, a path designed not for efficiency, but for maximum impact. She enlisted the aid of her tenant, Ethan Kovach. She asked him, the man living in her home, the man whose presence was a constant reminder to her husband of the life he had lost, to drive her over to David's place of business. The plan was for Ethan to wait outside in the car, a silent, visible accomplice, while Linda went inside to deliver the devastating blow. Judge Judy, with her profound understanding of human nature, saw the truth of the situation instantly. She turned to David Goolsby and articulated the raw, painful motive behind this theatrical serving of papers. "Now, I don't know why your wife was so angry with you, sir," she began, a statement that hung in the air, inviting a universe of unspoken transgressions. David's quiet, resigned admission, "She did," confirmed it. There was a history here, a well of anger and hurt that gave this act its venom. The judge didn't need the sordid details. She grasped the overarching narrative. Then what she wanted to do was embarrass you, she stated, not as a question, but as a verdict in itself. David could only agree, the humiliation of that day still palpable in his subdued, "I felt that was the case, yes." Judge Judy drove the point home with absolute clarity. Absolutely. There's no question about that. If she had good cause to ask you to leave and she wanted to embarrass you, then she would take the papers over to your place of business rather than hiring an innocuous process server. So she tried to embarrass you. Now imagine the scene from David Goolsby's perspective. He is at his workplace, a Papa John's pizza restaurant, a place of routine and order. The air is likely filled with the smell of baking dough and tomato sauce, a mundane backdrop for a deeply personal drama. In walks the woman who was once his wife, the person he promised to share his life with. But she is not there for a reconciliatory slice of pizza. She is there to officially and publicly end their marriage. The papers are placed in his hands. The legal process has begun. But the true sting, the intentional salt-in-the-wound insult, comes next. He looks outside. Through the window, across the parking lot, he sees a familiar car. And inside that car, sitting in the driver's seat, is Ethan Kovach, the man who had moved into his home just before he left it. The man who was now living with his soon-to-be ex-wife. The man who was, in this moment, acting as her chauffeur and moral support for this deeply humiliating act. The sight must have been a visceral blow. It wasn't just the divorce papers. It was the entire ugly tableau. It was the public announcement of his replacement, the symbol of his failure sitting right outside his job, where his 5 co-workers could see, could whisper, could wonder. Ethan, for his part, had at least attempted a flimsy veil of discretion. As he told the court, he had parked on the other side of the building, hoping to avoid being seen. It was a naive, almost laughable gesture, like hiding an elephant behind a lamppost. He was an integral part of a mission designed to be seen. He sat there, a nervous participant in this drama, his eyes glued to the restaurant's windows. And then he saw it. The calm shattered. He described the scene with a clarity that suggested it had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. I see him through the windows running around the north side of the building and turning the corner towards me with a metal object. The image is cinematic and terrifying. David Goolsby was no longer a cuckolded husband being served papers. He was a bolt of human lightning, fueled by a torrent of bottled-up rage, embarrassment, and betrayal. He had transformed from a recipient of bad news into an agent of vengeance. The metal object in his hand was a tire iron, a tool of practical mechanics perverted into a weapon of passionate retribution. Ethan Kovach, trapped in the confines of his vehicle, could only watch as the storm descended upon him. There was no time to start the engine, no time to roll up the window, no time to do anything but brace for the inevitable. David Goolsby did not yell, did not pause for a confrontation. His anger was beyond words. In one fluid, violent motion, he swung the tire iron. The sound must have been horrific, a sickening, metallic crash that echoed through the quiet parking lot. A sound that was the physical manifestation of a marriage exploding, and came and swung and ended up hitting the top of my car, Ethan recounted. Judge Judy, ever the seeker of precise facts, asked, "How many times?" "One time," he replied. "One time was enough. The damage was done. The lawsuit was for that damage, for the cost of repairing the brutal dent and scrape that now marred his car door. A permanent souvenir of a day he never should have been a part of. The evidence was presented. The estimate for the repairs was offered, a dry numerical summary of an emotionally charged event. But as Judge Judy examined the paperwork, everyone in that courtroom knew the case was about so much more than the dollar amount on that estimate. It was about the chain of bad decisions that led to that parking lot. Ethan's decision to stay in the house after his landlord left. His decision to agree to drive Linda on her mission of maximum embarrassment. David's decision to let his anger override his reason, to exchange his position as the wronged party for that of the violent aggressor. Linda's decision to use both of these men as pawns in the painful endgame of her marriage. In the end, the law deals in tangible damages. The swing of the tire iron was an undeniable illegal act. David Goolsby was held responsible for the cost of repairing Ethan Kovach's car. But the real cost, the emotional and relational devastation, was a debt that no courtroom could ever truly settle. Lesson for the listeners and viewers. The tragicomedy that unfolded in that Papa John's parking lot serves as a powerful, universal lesson about the high price of pride and the perils of poor judgment. When emotions run high, especially the volatile cocktail of anger, betrayal, and humiliation, the easiest path is often the most destructive. Linda Goolsby chose public embarrassment over private process, a decision that intentionally provoked a reaction. Ethan Kovach chose to be a participant in that provocation, blind to the obvious danger. And David Goolsby, in his moment of peak fury, chose to answer emotional pain with physical violence, a choice that not only cost him money in damages, but also any moral high ground he might have held. This story screams a clear warning. Do not allow yourself to be a pawn in someone else's war. And never, ever let your emotions turn a tool in your hand into a weapon against someone else. The temporary satisfaction of revenge is never worth the permanent consequences that follow. The real victory lies in taking the high road, even when every fiber of your being is pulling you toward the path of destruction.